11:59 at Radio Free America, and this is Uncle Sam with music and the truth until dawn. Right now, I got a few words for some of our brothers and sisters in the occupied zone. The chair is against the wall. The chair is against the wall. John has a long mustache. John has a long mustache. It's 12 o'clock, Americans, another day closer to victory. And for all of you out there on or behind the lines, this is your song.
And welcome everybody to another edition of our Minuteman University series of interviews with Second Amendment advocates. Today we're talking with Tim from Military Arms Channel, and we take an hour whenever we can to chat with Second Amendment advocates. I model this show off of a couple of podcasts I'm a big fan of, the James Kalita, Out of Order with James Kalita podcast out of New Jersey, Riding Shotgun with Charlie, another great Second Amendment podcast, and then of course Gun Freedom Radio out of Arizona with Cheryl and Dan Todd. And my only complaint with any of those podcasts is they never give the guests enough time to chat. So our motivation here is to give you some time, an hour or so with Second Amendment advocates. Now this one's a little unique because Tim's been an advocate for a long time, very publicly. So we're going to kind of change tracks today and chat about Second Amendment advocacy in 2019 and where we're at and where we can go for 2020. But let's get the introductions out of the way. Tim, thanks for joining us. You know, it's a challenge for you to schedule an hour like this. I appreciate your time.
No, thank you. I know we've been trying to get together for quite some time, and it's just, you know, everybody's schedules are so hectic. People don't realize just how busy it is trying to manage a YouTube channel. I jokingly say, go get a real job. It's like, yeah, right. It's we work 24/7 for the most part, but yeah, thanks for having me on. And I know that you're very much, I mean, we've had many meetings, you know, over dinner and whatnot, and phone calls discussing the importance of people getting active in fighting for our Second Amendment rights. And it seems that, you know, when we have a Democrat in office, gun owners go to sleep. I'm sorry, the exact opposite. They wake up. So during the Obama years, for example, you know, gun owners were very, very active. And anytime an anti-gun measure was proposed, we had people out in front of their state houses and stuff like that. And people were very, very active. But when we get a Republican in office, that's when gun owners tend to go to sleep. They're like, oh, we got a Republican. They're going to protect us. Nothing bad could possibly happen. And they just don't care. And that's how we get bad things passed. And that's exactly how we wound up with a ban on bump stocks after the Vegas incident. You know, it's we had eight years of Obama and no major anti-gun law passed. And then, you know, under the Trump administration, he's pushed through, we're not even through the congressional system or through our representatives, but just pushed through administrative changes by ordering the ATF to redefine what a machine gun is and ban an accessory that was perfectly legal to own before he decided to make them illegal, and without an act of Congress or compensating you for the loss of your property. But so I like to get people to realize that even though we have Republicans in power, that we still have to fight for our rights, because you know this as well as anybody. We've lost more of our rights under Republican leadership than we have under Democratic leadership. And that's not for a lack of trying on the Democrat side, right? And this is why I'm neither a Democrat or Republican, but it's because gun owners go to sleep. Reagan gave us the Hughes Amendment. He signed that into law under the NRA's urging, and that was the banning of machine guns. And so anything made after 1986, you can't own. Anything made before 86, you can own if you are a millionaire or it's rapidly approaching billionaire status. So, you know, a lot of bad stuff has happened under Republicans. And so I want people to realize that we can't just go to sleep when we have a Republican in office. And when we're talking about Second Amendment rights, I would say probably 30, maybe even 40% of my viewership self-identifies as being Democrat. So it's not gun ownership and gun rights and being a Second Amendment advocate isn't a Republican or a Democrat thing. And the unfortunate reality is, if you take a look at the current crop of presidential hopefuls on the Democratic side, it seems like every one of the 24, and maybe it's more than that now, have in the past or currently said something that is anti-gun, that they would try to do something to further restrict firearm ownership in the United States. And who was it? Was it Kamala Harris that said if she became president, she would use her executive authority to take away my FFL and everybody else's? And so that's kind of stuff that we're facing coming up in this next election. And during election cycles, gun owners are very active. We'll see them out there protesting and writing letters and making phone calls. But then if, again, a Republican wins, then they just kind of go back into hibernation and assume everything's going to be safe, and then wake up and go, oh, well, how did this happen? We had a Republican in office. So, yeah, I think that that's kind of incumbent upon all of us to try to keep people motivated. But then again, it's hard to keep people motivated when you're constantly in a defensive position. You can only maintain a defensive position for so long, then morale starts to break down. And so, you know, I was really hoping that, and I knew better, but I was really hoping that when Trump won the presidency and then the Republicans had control of the House and the Senate, I was really optimistic and hoping that we would start to see not only new gun laws not being passed, but undoing some of the gun laws that had already been passed and that are gross infringements on our rights. And nothing happened. They didn't do a darn thing. And if anything, they, you know, passed a bump stock ban, and now they're pushing for red flag laws. And, you know, it's just disheartening, and it's hard to maintain people, keeping them motivated. I know that people get mad when they get emails, for example, from the GOA, or if they get their mailbox blown up by the NRA saying, hey, we need the money, and look at what's coming up now, and look at this, look at this, look at this, and this constant, you know, we're about to lose our gun rights, you need to act now. People can only stay motivated and excited by that type of information for so long, and then they finally just go, it's, you know, it's just them begging for money again, or it's not real, whatever excuse they may come up with. It's just crying wolf too many times. And so there's just so many things that we're combating, trying to get people motivated. And, you know, through what we do over on the Military Arms channel, it's not a channel about politics. We only go political when we need to, typically around election times, during the Obama years. Anytime there was some sort of a shooting, you know, they immediately introduced anti-gun laws, and we would make videos to try to motivate people to make phone calls and write letters to their representatives to try to stop those laws. And we were very successful as a community in doing that. But yeah, man, I'm not sure what to think about where we're headed into 2020 and how things are going to play out. I'm really concerned that, you know, if it seems like we're just one election away from something really, really bad happening. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, I remember Reagan, right? We're one generation from losing the freedoms that, you know, we've accumulated.
Yeah, he may have been a little bit off on the time frame, but it's not. See, I grew up, and as a kid, Reagan was the president, and I never in my wildest dreams thought that I would live to see the day that a communist/socialist would openly run as such for the presidency of the United States. And yet here we sit.
And not be ostracized and ridiculed and laughed at, but taken seriously.
Right. I mean, 30 years ago, they wouldn't even be on the stage in the debates. You know, they would be blackballed. There's no way you're going to get a communist up there. We were fighting communism, and communism has killed more people in this world, and communism and socialism are practically synonymous because most communist countries are truly socialist countries. You know, good grief. The number of people that Pol Pot has killed, and Mao and Stalin, and the list goes on, is just astronomical. And, you know, to think that we would have people going, oh, well, gee, you know, we're going to do a different type of socialism. Democratic socialism isn't the same type of socialism that's failing in Venezuela or that got millions of people killed in Russia. It's a different type. It's a more free type, and it's just absolute nonsense. It's an oxymoron. It's like jumbo shrimp. You can't have freedom in a communist/socialist society. But yeah, I mean, we're a little over a generation past that, but here we sit. And we have, you know, people openly running as communists or socialists here in the States. And to me, that's just simply mind blowing. But it's incrementalism. And that's how they're taking our gun rights away from us as well, right? It's through incrementalism. So if you take a look at somebody that was born in the 2000s, they never knew what life was like when you could walk into a hardware store and buy a machine gun, have the paperwork back in 4 weeks, and just own it like any other gun. I've talked to so many people, like, and I know you post stuff on Instagram and you get similar comments, repeal the NFA. And we'll have people that will say, I'm pro Second Amendment. I'm a staunch Second Amendment supporter, but why do you want a machine gun?
But, yeah, exactly.
But, right. And it's like, wow, man, now and that's the anti-gunners long game. And that's what they're playing against us. They're playing a long game. They know if they can just incrementally take bits and pieces of our rights away, that next generation that never had the right to begin with, you don't miss what you never had. And that's where we're at. And now we're not only having to fight to get our rights back, but we're fighting to educate the younger gun owner and trying to convince them that concealed carry isn't a bad thing. Machine guns don't equate to blood in the streets and gunfights like in the Old West, which didn't really happen either. But, you know, we're fighting to educate staunch gun owners as to what the Second Amendment really means and trying to get our rights back. And so we're fighting multifaceted fronts, and it's just overwhelming at times. And I get kind of disillusioned, you know, when we roll around on the anniversary of the machine gun ban, and I make a post saying repeal the NFA, and I know you do too. And reading some of the comments is just like, oh man, we've fallen so far. And the anti-gunners playing this long game against us, they're winning. Slowly, they're winning. And anybody that thinks that you can sit down and have a rational conversation with somebody that wants to disarm us, and if you think there's any type of compromise to be made, like, well, we'll give you this and we want this in exchange. Well, first of all, that never happens. That's a true compromise. What we do is just surrender our rights to them. So through the slow surrendering of bits and pieces of our rights, we'll give them 30-round magazines. We'll allow a 10-round magazine ban to happen under the next administration, perhaps, or, you know, the SAFE Act that passed in New York and all this other stuff. This incrementally, so when the next generation is born and all they've ever known was 10-round magazines, they'll be saying, well, what did you want 30-round magazines for? Why would I fight to have 30-round magazines? I have plenty of fun with my 10-round magazines. It's the same thing, right? And it just seems, somebody my age, and I'm in my 50s, it's so overwhelming at times to think that, you know, we're not only fighting anti-gun forces, but we're also fighting to educate the pro-gun side and to get them on the right side of the argument, and to dig in and not accept the notion that there's a compromise to be struck somewhere, because nowhere else in the Bill of Rights does it say shall not be infringed. I mean, that is the strongest wording our founding fathers used in any of the documents that they wrote. The First Amendment doesn't say shall not be infringed. The Second Amendment says shall not be infringed. So when we say all gun laws are unconstitutional and all gun laws are illegal and all gun laws need to be repealed, you shouldn't look at me like I'm a radical. It's not a radical concept. But if I'm a radical in the same sense that Thomas Jefferson was, or any of the other founding fathers. And so we got to get gun owners thinking that way, because them thinking, well, you know what, I don't really use an AR-15. I'm a deer hunter. I'm perfectly fine with my bolt action 30-06. I'm not going to go out and, you know, protest this law or try to get these laws undone. It doesn't really interest me. We got to push through that somehow. And I'm open to ideas on how we do it. You know what I mean? I don't know which is more demoralizing, fighting the anti-gunners endlessly or fighting to educate the new gun owners and the younger generation to accept the fact that our Second Amendment rights are in fact absolute, and every single gun law is a gross infringement. The fact that we have to fill out a 4473 form is a gross infringement. And beyond that, with the NFA, the Supreme Court has already ruled in a different case that you can't tax a right. They determined that when I think it was a 2-cent tax that was going to be applied against a newspaper. And the Supreme Court said, no, you can't tax a right, the right being free speech. Well, how did they get away with the NFA for so long? You know what I mean? It's like they're taxing you to own something. And if you don't pay your tax and you own that something, they'll put you in prison for 10 years. Oh man, I guess I could ramble on forever.
Well, that's a good intro. So we're 15 minutes in, you covered a lot of stuff. So I'm going to go back. I made a couple of notes here. Some things we can kind of focus on and work towards, you know, where we go in 2020. But you kind of started out talking about some of the absurd things that are being proposed. Where do you think of some of these, like you say, like the idea of getting rid of all FFLs? Another ridiculous quote was they're going to stop the importation of AR-15s, just showing their lack of awareness of where these things are even come from, where their origins are. But some of these absurd or frivolous ones, what do you consider, how much of a threat do you consider these?
Well, so let's go back to the bump stock ban. And I was very vocal about it being a bad thing. And everybody kept saying, well, I don't even want to own one of those stupid things. I mean, they don't really work all that well. They're silly. It's a waste of ammunition. Let's not fall on our swords over these things. Let's just let them have them if that'll make them go away, which is an insane strategy to begin with. But I kept saying it's not about the stocks. It's not about the stocks. And that's how we wind up with Kamala Harris's comments, because she looked at what the Trump administration accomplished through executive fiat, and she thinks I can do the same thing, and she can.
Yeah,
exactly. If she becomes president, because of the precedent that Trump has set, and it's yet to be challenged in the courts, which I'm part of a lawsuit challenging it in the courts. But since we haven't gotten a Supreme Court decision, right now that precedent's set, and she can walk into office if elected, and she can start banning things by the stroke of a pen. She can instruct her ATF director, which is an appointment she gets to make, and say, hey, find a way to ban semi-automatics. They're all readily convertible to machine guns. Get rid of them. And they can do it. And there's another end run around Congress, and you can thank President Trump and the NRA for that little end run, because they just did it to us, and now they set that precedent. And that's why we kept saying, it's not about the stocks, man. They violated so many different individual liberties in doing what they did. I mean, here was an item that was perfectly legal. It was purchased when it was legal. So there's a thing called a grandfather clause. It's private property. You owned it. You paid hundreds of dollars to buy this thing. And then they go and make a rule change, redefine what a machine gun is, retroactively enforce it, stomping all over the grandfather clause, taking your personal property away, not even compensating you for it. I mean, geez, they were just wiping their rear ends with the Constitution and Bill of Rights, and nobody really got up in arms about it because of the way the media portrayed it and the way gun owners looked at it. It's just a stupid accessory. And now you're going to see what that precedent is capable of doing to us in the future, and that's why I'm scared of the next few elections. You know what I mean? If we get a staunchly anti-gun president, we already have a staunchly anti-gun House. If that falls to the Senate, it could go bad. I mean, like sideways bad, the bad we don't want to talk about. So,
but some of these are the ridiculous ones. I mean, that's one that wasn't really even a bill or like a position or anything. That just came out of nowhere, and we got hit with it. You know, that's a whole nother discussion. I'm concerned about these. I think it was earlier in the year. Maybe it was it? Yeah, I can try and put in with SHOT Show. I think it was maybe even before SHOT Show. You and Jared and a couple others had done some interviews with Gun Owners of America, with Eric, to chat about the status of the bump stock. And I think in those, I don't remember if it was yours or Jared's interview, Eric had talked about one of the strategies for 19 would be to, I guess one of the strategies against all these superfluous, I don't know what the right word is, these like nonsense bills that are going to be flooding both federal and local levels, was to one of his I guess counters was to send things through like the hearing protection and the reciprocity, in order to, I guess, balance the votes or something. Like if you're going to vote no on this one, then you got to vote yes on this one. I'm not explaining it well, but I guess
I'm having a hard time remember that conversation, but that's, you know,
yeah, it was a while ago, but it seemed tough to take, because it's like, wow, I mean, they're definitely, it seems like they've got a potential there. When they throw so many little garbage bills at us, it's difficult to defend against each of them. So any that slip through is a win. Of course, they get to champion, even if they attempt one. If it gets challenged, if it gets defeated, they get to say that they tried. But my fear is that some of these will sneak through and they accumulate and create precedent.
Well, I've also noticed a really scary trend as well, and I don't hear a whole lot of people in our community talking about it, but I've brought it up before. You know, the anti-gun forces have not met with much success at the federal level over the last couple of decades. You know, they've gotten bills passed here and there. They're the biggest piece of anti-gun legislation they got passed in '94, sunset in 2004, thank God. But you know, they've not met with a whole lot of federal success in trying to ban guns or further restrict our access to firearms. And so there's this really dangerous paradigm shift where the anti-gunners have taken up a grassroots effort, and they're pushing through laws at the state level, and they've been very successful. And this is harder for organizations like GOA and SAF and even the NRA when they actually do something. It's very difficult for them to fight those battles because at the federal level, you have one place to go to fight the battle, and that's in the halls of Congress and the president, right? You can go have a conversation with him or our representatives. But when you have 50 states and each of the states are starting to try to pass their own anti-gun laws that are extremely restrictive. I mean, we have bans on all types of things in various states from New Jersey to Connecticut to California. We're seeing sweeping bans taking place. And I mean, we have magazine ban in Colorado. I think Washington State's just had a referendum that passed that bans a bunch of stuff. I mean, it's never ending. I can't even keep up with it. Now imagine the costs of a group like GOA or SAF or NRA, the costs of them having to retain lawyers in all those states and fight all those laws and lobbyists to lobby in all those states. That's very, very hard for them to do, especially in the case of the NRA when the money's being squandered for $39,000 in suits and, $1 million airplane rides to the Bahamas. But for organizations like GOA that actually spend the money in the right way, that's really hard for them to fight on all those different fronts. And that's how the anti-gunners have seen a lot of success in the last few years. And they know it, and they're ramping it up. And you have some big financiers like Soros and Bloomberg and others that are dumping millions, if not billions, into this effort. And that's the one that really scares me.
Yeah, it's still millions, luckily. I call it AstroTurf because it's, although it mimics grassroots, they're paying for it. Their strategy in Washington State, for example, is go in, and Nevada was the same thing, I believe, to go in and literally hire all the marketing agencies. So there wasn't even a marketing agency left to hire. If you're a pro-gun, they would hire them all and put them on the task of passing a ballot initiative. Once you get enough people duped into signing a ballot initiative, it's on the thing. They put their efforts towards confusing the issue. They'll call it something that sounds safe, and then it's like you say, it's been super effective.
Yeah.
But like Gary, Gizzard Gary on the YouTube side, we've heard a lot of issues, but what's some of the solutions? So, whenever we look at things tactically or strategically, right, there's having a Bloomberg on the other side, having giant money that buys this stuff. I see that as much as an advantage for them as it is a disadvantage for them. It's an angle that we can attack. When we talk about the shift, and I agree with you 100%, they shifted in 94. The paradigm shifted in 94 from the federal level. And like you said, there was an echo. There was not an echo. There was a silence for years based on the consequences that voters gave to the representatives in 94 for passing that horrible bill, the assault weapons ban.
Yeah.
And that's where, unfortunately, like you say, we're a generation away from people that experienced that. And it happened before the internet. So there's just, we have that difficulty. But I think what we've got is an advantage because they have separated it into smaller fights, but we have the ability to, like never before, with the technology and the methods of communication that we're working on and mastering, to unite resources like we've never done before. We're not living in some sort of a paradigm where we have to live with the resources of the past. We create new resources as we go forward, and a motivated citizenry or a motivated populace is always going to be more effective than a single entity with resources. So I guess the question is, you mentioned it as we kind of started the show here, the frustration with, I don't know we call it apathy a lot, but with the idea that there's this ease that, everybody can take a breath and be easy when we have an R in office, which we all know is wrong. It's a foolish way to be. But how do we change the mindset of gun owners that we need to be in the long game, like you're saying? There's strategies of like gameplay where you have like a baseball game where your strategy is to win, and then there's military strategies where your goal is to survive and to keep fighting and be alive at the end. And that's where the antis, they've got like that forever. They've got forever. Their goal is to screw up our country. So every time they break a window or cause distrust between ourselves, cause frustration, or to cause apathy, they win. And every time they get a victory, they win even more. And that causes all the stuff that they're searching for. So it is frustrating, but at the same time, I think once we've established, I believe, once we've established with the community some wins, or at least focus on some of the wins that we've had, and we start to get motivated over things like the 4473 and NFA and the Hughes Amendment, and we start to get a few wins in that direction, not only will we be stronger, but the antis, the political strategists that watch this, will run like cowards, because they're not looking for a fight. They're looking for an ambush with a conclusion that they can, with a conclusion that they can assume is going to happen. And that's, I always use the analogy of a punching bag. They know that antis can come up to the gun lobby. They can punch it as hard as they want, and that punching bag's going to swing away from them, and they can stand there with a grin on their face, taking all the pictures they want, saying they took a giant slug at the gun industry, and it's going to lose some momentum. It's going to lose some friction as it swings back, and it's, you know, like a pendulum. It's never going to hit them back. Once we figure out how to work together to lose some of that friction and to push back when they hit us, they're going to run like cowards they are. Well, and they're going to go fight something like swimming pools or stairways or buses or something.
There's something you mentioned, I think, is I kind of want to expound upon a little bit. You know, you're talking about the 94 assault weapons ban. And I've always held and said many times before, if social media existed in 1994 to the extent it exists today, that law never would have became law. You know, we didn't have a way to communicate and to organize then. I mean, the internet was around, of course. I mean, I was working in the internet in those years,
schools,
especially the early 90s.
Few people,
and then 94 definitely was already off into a career with the internet, but you know, it just wasn't evolved yet. I mean, it was mostly very rudimentary web pages and, you know, discussion forums and bulletin boards, things like that. But no real, what we now call, and I don't like being called this, and I don't like the phrase, but the influencers didn't yet exist. You didn't have big, loud voices in social media. People had built audiences yet. And had we had that then, I think we could have stopped that legislation butt cold, just like we did after Sandy Hook and Obama's attempt to accomplish pretty much the same thing. And the people that showed up on almost every single courthouse or state house lawn in nearly all 50 states, that was organized through social media, and people like us. And when I say us, everybody watching this video and beyond, people that are active in social media, we in social media, we the people did that. And it wasn't the NRA, it wasn't even GOA, it wasn't any of these big groups that everybody wants to say, here's my $25, now go protect my rights, leave me alone, I got to mow the lawn. It, you know, fighting for your rights is a lot more than that. And we've proven that we can do that, but it's in little microbursts, and then we go back to sleep. But yeah, I think we're seeing now that the powers that be have watched the rise of social media, the influence that social media has on elections and policy and politics. And now we're seeing those people that run the platforms like YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Now they're silencing the voices of those with whom they don't agree. And now we're having to have that national debate of, well, is Facebook a publisher, or is it, you know, is it like a town square? Is it the new digital town square? Is it a monopoly? Does it need to be broken up under antitrust laws? I mean, but that's because we have these entities now that are silencing those of us that express our particular views. They squash us in search results. They constantly harass us on YouTube. I mean, we just got more rules and regulations dumped on us today, or in the last week, that aren't even written publicly. You just stumble into them when they ban your account or demonetize you completely. But they're silencing the voices that they don't agree with and promoting the side of the argument that they do agree with. So now you have these mega social media platforms that are silencing the voices of the people, and they're swaying the outcome of elections. So it's really weird how all this has kind of gone on over the last couple of decades, and how we landed where we are today. And how is it that all these major social media players, the YouTubes and Instagrams and Facebooks of the world, how is it they're owned by complete communists that want to completely take over every aspect of our daily lives, that want to disarm us, that want to subjugate us? How is it they came to power? You know what I mean? It's so weird. There isn't a constitutionalist right wing, if you will, another term I hate, but just a constitutionalist conservative, if you will, alternative anywhere in the social space. And any that tries to pop up, it never gets any traction. So, we're stuck with the YouTubes and the Googles and the Twitters and the Instagrams and the Facebooks of the world for now, anyway. But we need to fight for our very existence here, because we have the power to stop the legislation. We proved that during the right after Sandy Hook, and that is scaring the powers that be. The fact that we have these voices, so they're going to try to take our voices away from us.
That's an interesting point you brought up there, and I don't think anyone's ever heard anybody ask that way before. But we've all, I'm sure people that are watching this that are familiar with the internet have at least understood the concept of the story of Facebook or Google. These guys started in colleges and got an idea, and then it grew and caught on and caught fire, I guess, and they became huge entities. Do you think that they actually started out being like that, or do you think it's one of those deals where power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely? Like once they get to an amount of power, do you think they changed, or do you think they had that? I mean, just personal.
It's pure speculation, right? I put my tinfoil hat on and come up with all sorts of crazy ideas, but I don't know how it happened. I don't know if it's by design or if it's just by bad luck on our part. But if you take a look at it, there used to be a joke when I was younger that, people through their college years would tend to be, kind of hippie, left-leaning, very socialistic in their mindset through their collegiate career. But once they hit the workforce and had to start paying taxes, that's when they started to turn around and start to see things the other way, and they became more conservative, right? That used to be the case, but the socialists have definitely commandeered our educational system from the public schools all the way up through the collegiate level. And so our children are completely indoctrinated into this line of thinking and being taught revisionist history, and they're programming the masses to accept their fate as subjects. And so the Zuckerbergs of the world are victims of that. But you would think once they became billionaires, they would start to see the other side, because that's the way it kind of played out before. But that's not what's happening now.
Though, I bet you the difference is, like you said, that I agree with you 100% that's usually the way that it works. But the difference between those guys and a typical scenario is that typically you work for your money, you appreciate how much effort it takes to get it, and watch it work for yourself, and at a whatever level that's reasonable for a regular person with a job, compared to these guys that immediately went from zero to just flooded with money. You can't appreciate millions of dollars when it's basically handed to you.
Right. So maybe they never got that evolutionary period, right? They can afford to have that ideology.
Exactly. And you go from like idealistic kid to wealthy,
billionaire idealistic kid.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So it's definitely a struggle. Let me ask you, you've got a unique perspective on this in many ways, because you've been in the tech industry for a while, but you're also a big player in the world of whatever we call, technical or internet communications now. And unlike some of the people that are just, doing stuff on the one or two platforms, you're doing stuff in real life and traveling around. You're part of the industry and stuff. So, and you've been so for a while. We've had conversations in our workshops and on gun channels and stuff about, where it's all going. And when we look at, the big picture, we look at, back from the 90s where the internet comes from, and, bigger picture where we start with the printing press, which free press and freedom of speech, and then television and radio and all these different mediums that we adjust to, and then phones and then smartphones and carrying the internet around with us and having internet and then high speed bandwidth, and again, being able to carry that around with us. As we see the internet going, it's going somewhere. It's probably going to some sort of a Star Trek communicator, built into our clothing or our glasses or something smaller, interfaces. But as we go forward, do you think that the YouTubes and the Facebooks, these social media platforms, are going to go the way of the AOL and the MySpace, and we'll see new things? Or do you think that people, I'm going to leave it open, where do you think we're going as not just the gun culture, but just as a society and tech in general?
So, I mean, let's face it, our species is very dependent on tech, and we're constantly striving to achieve more. It's human nature, right? And that's why capitalism is such a great system versus communism or socialism, because communism, socialism denies you that competitiveness that makes you succeed and exceed, right? So when you have a free market and open capitalism, you're always trying to build that better mousetrap, and you're always trying to achieve more. You're trying to push the envelopes more. And that's how we see such rapid advancements in technology. Where is it all going to go? I don't know, but will Facebook and Google and YouTube and all of those go the way of MySpace at some point, historically speaking? Yeah, they will. Because if you take a look at Fortune 500 companies from 100 years ago and see how many of them are still Fortune 500 companies today, almost all of them have failed. And almost all of them are no longer Fortune 500 companies, and a good number don't even exist anymore. I remember when Sears occupied a massive tower in downtown Chicago, and now they're just occupying a little building out in the suburbs of Chicago. You know what I mean? And the building's been sold to investors. So, and there's one time where Sears was it, you know what I mean? And they owned the catalog space and the Woolworths of the world or the country and stuff like that. So, yeah, they definitely will go the way of the dodo. They always do, or they'll be parted out, broken up, and something better will come along. And trying to predict that, I mean, it's anybody's guess, right? If you would have asked me 20 years ago if I would be doing what I'm doing today, or if you told me I would be doing what I'm doing today, I would have laughed at you and said that's highly impossible. I mean, there's no way I would have any type of a following and people would care about me shooting guns or care about my politics and my views on politics and stuff. And yet here we sit. So I couldn't tell you where it's all headed. All I know is that looking at the trend, it doesn't favor us and our opinions and our view of things. And when I say our view of things and us, I'm talking about those of us that are of a constitutional mindset. And I think that a lot of us really want the reset button hit. And by that, I'm not advocating for civil war. That's the last thing that I want. But something's got to give, because all this tension is building. And if you take a look at the last election cycle, I mean, even within my own family, when Trump became elected, people stopped coming to Christmas dinner. People stopped talking to each other. Family members unfriended each other on Facebook over political views. That's how divisive things have become. And that's the type of divisiveness this nation faced in the 1860s. And it's happening again. And the media is pushing that narrative. You have CNN and MSNBC and even Fox News out there pushing the other side. They're the enemy. They must be destroyed. And it's gone to the point where we're going to go fisticuffs or something. Something's got to give. And I don't want that something to be a civil war, but we need to hit the reset switch. We got to bring civility back into the discussion, and we have to educate people and somehow convince people to appreciate their constitutional rights and not just willy-nilly give them away or bargain them away or negotiate them away. They have to understand that each and every one of them is critically important, and one supports the other. If the Second Amendment falls, the first isn't far behind. So, there was a careful balance struck. I mean, here's another thing we're talking about on the long drive out to the long range yesterday. Quietly, we're watching states now passing laws at the state level once again, where the popular vote is where the electors' votes must go now. Talking about the Electoral College. And you see the Democratic Party pushing for the disbanding of the Electoral College. And they want the popular vote to rule. That's anarchy. And that's not how our system of government works. And it makes me cringe, but I understand it now. And it's by design. Every single politician, every single teacher will tell you we have a democracy. And that's an absolute lie. We do not have a democracy. We have a representative constitutional republic. Democracy is anarchy, mob rules. And if we got rid of the Electoral College, our founding fathers were geniuses. And if we take away that critical component, then politicians won't go to Montana, Wyoming, Kansas, Missouri. They won't go to the small states with low population centers. They'll only go to Chicago. They'll only go to New York and Jersey. They'll only go to Tampa and Austin and Los Angeles and San Diego. That's because mob rules. And all of a sudden, a huge part of America will be disenfranchised. Go look at the last electoral map and look at the last election, and you'll see the entire United States is mostly red, and there's little pockets of blue. And those little pockets of blue, they represent half of the voting public at any given time. And it's amazing. So if you take away the Electoral College, you basically guarantee socialism will take over in this country, and we'll never be able to get rid of it. So, and that's happening at the state levels right now. And it's happening, and it's not being reported in the news. Even Fox News isn't running that up the flagpole. You're not going to hear CNN talk about it much, because that's what they want to happen. They want the Electoral College to go away, because that guarantees the socialists their foothold. And so it's bad, man. And I don't know, but there has to be a de-escalation point at some point, because I'm part of I grew up during the Cold War. I served in the military during the Cold War, and there was no way. I mean, we had many conversations. It's like, how is this going to end between us and the USSR? This escalation, we're constantly upping the ante. We kept spending more and more, and we're just going crazy building militaries, waiting for this clash in Europe to happen. And there seemed like there was no way out, that the only possible outcome was the two big dogs on the block were going to fight. And that was us, NATO and Warsaw. And yet I woke up one morning and the Soviet Union had collapsed and the Cold War was over. And so there was a peaceful outcome. But that was temporary. The Cold War is being started all over again, and this time China and Russia are good friends. And before they weren't, it really bodes poorly for us, because the Russians just went through a complete reset of their economy. They don't have all that debt. We're trillions of dollars in debt, and the next Cold War is going to bankrupt us, and we're going to fall. We don't want that, but that's another discussion altogether. But man, I don't know where all this ends. It's just I really hope that we can hit that reset button, and it doesn't mean a civil war. It means somehow there's an awakening and people realize they're being lied to, and they suddenly start to come to the realization that each and every right that was enumerated in the Bill of Rights is absolutely critical, and they all need to be fought for and preserved.
I hear you. And I don't want it to sound too dire, because like you say, we're just kind of thinking about the future and the way things can go. But when you talk about the manipulation, the Cold War and the tension that we had there, I think there is some manipulation here. We definitely have tension. It's a different way. It's not country against country, so it's not like theoretical tension that we had back then. And like you say, there was years, I can remember going all through high school, you just thought, at some point there's going to be a nuclear war and it's all over. It was fatalist, right? Yeah. And like you say, it just sort of, it ended. And, thank you for all the hidden, things that happened that made that happen. And there was a heck of a lot of people on the planet that didn't want to go to war, even though, the countries, the governments are the things that were leading towards it. Okay, anyway, so when we're talking about ways that we can talk about motivating and getting the Second Amendment community united at times when needed to either resist or ideally start to push back against some of the prior infringements, I think what we end up doing there is solidifying, at least working towards a more solidified constituency towards those bigger issues, right? If I think these issues that we look at in the, I'm a single issue voter with guns. A lot of us are kind of myopic at guns and stuff. But I don't think this is, I think one of the reasons I'm able as a rational person to be focused singularly on guns is I think they are a indicator of a bigger issue, and that's lack of fear of your neighbors. The ability to trust your neighbor to own whatever kind of property they might have, understanding that some of it is dangerous, is what freedom is, and it is what the United States is, this melting pot, the lack of fear of each other. And I think there are definitely players that are outside of the United States or potentially in it that want either chaos or the profit from the conflict. But potentially you don't fight us, you kill us, or you destroy us by making us fight from within. So I'm sure there are agents outside of our boundaries that are manipulating these social media platforms to that end. And it's a challenge that we all have to work together to overcome the deliberate manipulation to not be in fear of each other and not be willing to accept that they are the bad ones or they are the enemies. But that's, again, like you say, a bigger discussion. But I think that, like I say, I think working towards Second Amendment stuff is valid, because I think when we solidify our community, we can act as an example, and the efforts that we do can be used to challenge some of those other bigger issues that we have as far as, like I say, a representative. Well, we have a representative democracy, right? They like to simplify it to plain old
representative republic. Yeah.
But
they're programming us through the school systems and through every politician saying our democracy, our democracy, our democracy. What they're preparing us for is that mob rules with a socialist leadership, because we don't have a democracy. We never had, and God willing, we never will. We don't want a democracy. We don't want anarchy. I mean, I'm sure there's anarchists out there that do want anarchy, but just go watch The Walking Dead. That's the outcome of anarchy. Negan is what happens. There will be leaders that come to power, but they're going to come to power for the wrong reasons. Just by human nature, we band together in groups, and you'll always have leaders. You'll have alpha males and you'll have followers. And we don't want that type of chaos, because it's very violent, and it doesn't bode well for a society to be, very successful, right? You're not going to, if you have true anarchy, you're not going to have many people out there, spending billions of dollars looking for next cancer research or cures or, things like that. You're too busy fighting amongst yourselves just to have scraps to live on. That's no way to live. But yeah, I think that we, first of all, got to get, we have to teach Americans true history, and we have to teach, and this is something that I fight at the local level with our own school teachers. I've had this discussion with our teachers with regards to my children, which I have 3. And I've told them, you will not teach my child that this is a bad gesture or that firearms are bad or evil in any way. And they're like, oh no, we don't want to be offensive. We wouldn't do that. We know what you do for a living and blah, 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 blah. And it's all about not being offensive. And I say, well, you're not offending me. I'm just telling you, I never want to get a phone call saying that your son was doing this in class, or that they were playing guns on the playground, because that's normal for them. Because when they leave school, they're going to go home, pick up a Nerf gun, and they're going to chase the neighbor kid around the block, shoot Nerf darts at them all day long. And it's perfectly normal for them. They go hunting. It's perfectly normal for them. And I don't want the system teaching my children that their freedoms are bad or wrong. And so I've won that battle at a small degree in my local area, but we need all Americans doing that and being forceful about it, because we have to stop this indoctrination that's happening, where we're letting these far left crazy socialists, basically program our children from the earliest days of their school careers all the way through the collegiate level, because what's coming out on the other end is absolute lunacy, and it's not going to end well for the United States. It just isn't. And we got to get people back to thinking about what the Constitution is. They need to understand that the Bill of Rights has a very specific purpose, and you can't just keep nibbling away at it. It doesn't need to be rewritten 50 times. You don't need to take big chunks of it out, and people have to appreciate that. And I just don't know how we accomplish that, because we've lost control of the school systems, even the public school systems and the private school systems. We've lost control of it. Almost all of them indoctrinate the children into this socialist line of thinking, that the government's good, it's here to help, and all you need to do is surrender all of your money and yourself to the government, and it'll take care of everything for you. And with that comes the destruction of our Second Amendment rights, because our founding fathers knew that the ultimate power of government needed to be in the hands of the people. And that means we have to be armed. And yes, that means we have grenade launchers. And yes, that means we have machine guns. And yes, that means we can have anti-tank weapons. That's because we are supposed to be the ultimate force in government. We only are governed by consent. And when our government no longer has our best interests at heart, it is our duty to reset that government. And that is written by the founding fathers. It's not radical. It's not treasonous. And that's what they will tell you. If you think that way, oh, that's treason. You're talking about treason if you want to throw out the existing government. No, that's why we set the government up the way we did. The power of the people is such that when that government stops serving the people and it no longer protects our liberties and starts taking them, then it's time for us to force a reset. And that's the reality of it, but that's not taught anymore. It's not taught.
And the consequences of that are that we've had all this time without needing that ultimate reset. And it's the fact that that reset has been there and continues to be there, that we're governed the way that, well, the representatives govern the way that we allow them. And who knows what would happen? Well, we know what would happen. We see Venezuela. We know what happens when they remove that reset button through all the means they're attempting to do it.
Right. And I never thought I'd live to see the day, but and I know the Bundys went kind of off the deep end, but you know, when the Bundy Ranch thing happened, we saw American patriots flow down to his ranch, and they stood toe to toe against government agents, and they stood them down, and the government backed off, and they went away, and it ended peacefully. So that was an example of what the Second Amendment was intended for. And it served its purpose there. It stopped a government from overreaching, and nothing bad happened to the people that were there. It always happens.
And it shows what a militia truly is. That people came from all around the country and they did nothing. They stood there in solidarity to prevent any further infringement, and it worked. And again, you know, you see these memes. You know, there's so many guns, there's so many ammos out there. If we were a problem, you'd know it. Well, I think, you know, let's not ignore the fact that when they talk of when they'll talk about tyranny as a thing of the past or outlandish or whatever, that's a recent example of small arms resisting tyranny. We have other examples out there, but I always like to focus on the fact that we can come together like that is what stops them from being tyrannical in the first place. As soon, we have yet to understand what it's like to have a government that can truly be tyrannical when they have no fear of consequences. We see it in other countries, but
absolutely,
the media shelters us from the actual, you know, consequences of those countries.
Yeah, it's you know, it's a necessity, and the government should fear the people. It shouldn't be the other way around. The people should not fear their government. The government should fear the people. Because again, we are supposed to be governed by consent, and we've lost that. And our children aren't being taught that. Our children are being taught that the government's all powerful. It's good. It's only here to help, and nothing that they do is bad. And the reality is the government is not our friend. It's not here to help. And all it is a machine that grows and grows and grows, and eventually will collapse in on itself. And in the process, it's going to destroy us and our civil liberties and our freedoms.
Well, and it's our challenge as free people to be ever vigilant against that. And again, what they'll suggest is that tyranny is violence, resistance to tyranny is violence, and it's not. It's the opposite. Resistance to tyranny is what we've had in this entire country, except for little times here and there with the Civil War or whatever. You know, we are living right now in resistance to tyranny. It's the lack of violence. It's the fear of the politicians, so what might happen. And they're trying desperately to remove that consequence. But let's move from overall political stuff. There was a couple of questions that came in as we're approaching the top of the hour here. Woods asked earlier on the gun channel side, many people look up to you, Tim, as a great 2A activist. Who are your mentors and heroes in Second Amendment?
I think there's so few, because it seems like every time I think somebody's a great Second Amendment advocate, I get let down by something that they do eventually. I think one of the earliest ones was Neal Knox. He was one of the first people to really want to force change within the NRA, and you know, he did some good stuff. You know, a lot of people say Charlton Heston, which I challenge them to find a picture of Charlton Heston holding an AK on an AR-15. I don't think an image exists, because he didn't believe that they should be owned by Americans. And there's this false image of him being some great Second Amendment defender, and he really wasn't. So I think I've kind of just gone off on my own, because I didn't feel that a lot of the people that were fighting for our rights, I thought were fighting for our rights, were, if you will, radical enough, because they were so willing to compromise. And I'm of the opinion, dig in your heels and fight. We've given so much. There's nothing left to give. Now it needs to go the other way. And so that's one of the reasons I look up to groups like the GOA. I started looking into their background and the fact that they are a true no compromise organization. I said, okay, that's an organization I can get behind, because they're not going to say, okay, something bad happened. Do you want to ban guns? Let's make a deal. We'll let you ban this if we can get this. No, you dig in your heels and fight, because you got to stop giving up rights incrementally. Again, they're playing a long game. They know if they hold out long enough, let's say 50 or 100 years, if we keep giving them bits and pieces of our rights, one day there'll be nothing left. And so, growing up, I used to think that President Reagan was a great icon, but then he signed the Hughes Amendment, and there's things that he said on, off the record that weren't exactly the most pro-gun. It seems like a lot of people are all too willing to waver on our Second Amendment rights. You take a look at Scalia, and he wrote the opinion in Heller, and that was a big win for us at the Supreme Court. And I'm like, yeah, I love Scalia, and then I read his opinion letter, and he left the door wide open for reasonable restrictions. Well, tell me, what is a reasonable restriction on an unalienable right, a right that shall not be infringed? What is a reasonable restriction on that? And so it seems like I constantly got let down by people I thought, had our back. And so I guess it's made me more radical, if you will, but it's just that I've had enough, and I don't want to give one more inch to the anti-gunners. And we got to start convincing our own community of that. There's nothing to be negotiated. And I don't want to have a conversation with the anti-gunners. There's no conversation I want to have. If you want to have a conversation with me, then the only thing I want to hear come out of your mouth is, here are the rights we've taken from you. We're sorry. You can have them back. Otherwise, I have nothing else to say to them. I don't want to make a deal with them. I have nothing to negotiate with them. I want them to either give us our rights back or fight them tooth and nail to get them back. And so it's been hard finding leaders that believe that, because all too often, what seems like a really strong Second Amendment advocate turns out to be somebody that's still willing to compromise and make deals and play loose and fast with our rights. And I'm just sick of it, man. It's just, I wish more people would read the Federalist Papers and read about our founding fathers and read what they had to say, and learn where we came from. And I just don't think that's being taught in our schools, not in the true light. I think revisionist history is being taught. But anyway, sorry, man, I get kind of off in the weeds.
No, seriously, it's good stuff. And I think that a lot of people have this mindset, especially people that are in the middle, right? That don't, there's however many gun owners. I've heard lots of numbers. Let's say, tens of millions of gun owners, but 300 million people plus in this country. So there's quite a few people that aren't anti and aren't gun owners. They just don't care in the middle somewhere. And where's I going with this? Those people, what was I going to say? They don't care one way or the other. And I think that they probably would assume that an eventuality is lack of all rights. And they play with some sort of, mindset that, all of these gun people are just holding on to what's eventually going to go the way of the dodo. Mm-hmm. I don't think that needs to be the perception at all. Like you say, we have a challenge because some people have not existed, have not been on this planet at a time when you could, like you say, literally, and we're not even exaggerating, walk into a gun shop or hardware store, for crying out loud, buy a machine gun, and go shoot it if you wanted to, or whatever you're going to do with it. So people that
restrictive NFA, it was like a 4-week wait. It was a year.
But people don't live in that world, so they don't realize that we have all the right in the world to live in that world again. And we're not talking about holding on to things that are eventually going to be lost. No, I'm looking at it the other way around. We have all the potential in the world to challenge the 4473s. These universal background checks are ridiculous. Let's start challenging them on the effectiveness of the 4473s and why we should deal with the cost and the burden and the infringement of any of this. What does it help society at all? I think that's a great one to jump after first, right. Or in the near future. Once we get a bunch of people behind that and we see the momentum, once we remove that, we get rid of waiting periods, which are ridiculous. Based on an assumption that gun owners are angry and we're going to run into a gun shop and buy something every time we're angry. Removing these not only gets rid of the infringements, but gets rid of these social perceptions that the firearms owners have. So I think there's definitely things that we can do to start moving the ball the other way, like you mentioned. And once we do that, doom on them. They're going to figure out what it's like to have a motivated country of free individuals enjoying their rights and fighting for them.
Yeah, I totally agree. And one more, I just popped in my head, people look up to Ted Nugent and they call him Uncle Ted, and they think of Ted as being this big, staunch Second Amendment advocate. And he was quite proud of the fact that the NRA got the NICS passed, and he was fully in support of the NICS fix, which is something else that happened under the Trump administration. This NICS fix, which basically means further restrictions on your rights and further harassment of gun owners for no reason. And again, there's looking for those leaders that are out there to defend our Second Amendment rights. Every time you think you found one, they somehow fail you. You know what I mean? And it's kind of sad, because at one time I used to think Ted Nugent was amazing. I met him at SHOT Show years ago, and then I watched some of his videos and him talking about being proud that the NRA was, behind the original NICS system, and that he fully supported the NICS fix, and how that was going to, somehow better our Second Amendment rights and our position with those rights. And I was just, wow, man, it's everywhere you look. There's another one that's failing us.
Right. And, I don't know, we want to give people a benefit of the doubt. So who knows where his mindset is. I'm sure some people are literally, like Yankee would describe, elitists that just don't think other people should own guns or whatever. They got theirs and forget it. But I want to encourage people, value your voice, be part of the conversation, have conversations at the gun show, at gun shops, at church, school, work, when it's appropriate. You never know the person you're going to talk to and enlighten about something that's important with Second Amendment. For example, why you might want to own a machine gun. And if you can get that seed into someone's head, and maybe the two, how telephone works, or that game telephone works, 2 or 3 people down, or maybe that 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon or something. How do you know the 3rd or 4th person that relays your insight isn't going to talk to Ted Nugent and maybe change his tune or give him something to question? So I'm not being super crazy about it, but that's how we change. We don't have Bloomberg's on our side. I don't think we should look for Bloomberg's on our side. We all are the motivation. We can look at efforts like the M855 ban a couple of years back, when the ATF had pointed towards the M855 as needing to be newly re-regulated and in effect banned. And we got together pretty effectively as a group and combated that. We still had the memory of 13 and the resistance to Obama's executive actions. I think that was in 15, so it was kind of still in our recent memory. But I think we have the ability to gather together, and with the means of communications we've got and familiarity with them, we'll be more and more effective going forward.
Yeah. Well, hopefully. And we need to get people motivated and active. And I always encourage people, and don't just focus at the federal level, please focus at the state level, because ultimately we need to see the states starting to re-exert their own states' rights. We have states that are standing up to the federal government saying, if you pass any more restrictive gun laws, we're not going to enforce them in our states. And if you send your agents to enforce those laws, our police will arrest them. And so we need the states to start standing back up to the federal government, because the power of a government has changed drastically from its original conception under the founding fathers structure to what it is today. And most of that changed after the Civil War, where the states were autonomous. And after the Civil War, we had an all-powerful federal government. And that was in direct response to that conflict. And so, now the tables have turned. Now this once, very small government that was in a box and very tightly constrained now is out of the box, and it's now forcing itself on all 50 states, when it should be the other way around. The people in the states should be in power, and the federal government should be, subservient to us, not the other way around, which is how we currently find ourselves.
And again, it's that whole idea of the frog in the water, and it's slowly heating up. They've changed and changed. We've been generations away from that.
Yeah. And how they do it is they keep promising free stuff. It's like, hey, man, check this out. Wouldn't you like to go to college for free? Yeah. Okay. Just vote for me. You can go to college for free. The only problem is there's no such thing as free. Somebody's paying for that. Right. But that's how they indoctrinate. And they say, let's give you free healthcare. Let's give you free school. Let's give you free phones. Let's give you a free place to live. That sounds a lot like the Soviet Union, right? It's like, sure, man. Everybody drives this exact same car, wears the exact same clothes, lives in the exact same type of house, and everybody has the exact same everything. It's all leveled out, and the government makes sure it's that way. That's what socialism and communism is, and that's what they're driving us towards, and that's what we need to resist, and that's why our Second Amendment is so stinking important.
It is, and banding together to educate people about the second will empower us to do education about those other things, because you're right. That's basically what they're offering. And of course, they're not going to focus on every either socialist or communist situation. The elites in the party, of course, are living at a much higher level than
they're exempt
level. They want to. They
like
want
Obamacare. All the representatives that voted for it exempted their staff and themselves from the provisions of it.
Yeah,
that should be a federal crime. They should be put in prison for that. Here's a law for you serfs. You have to live under this law, but we wrote it and we passed it, but we're exempt because we're royalty. I mean, that stuff really goes on, and it's not widely reported, but that happened.
But I like to look again. We've got we look at the new generations, and we've been talking about some of the disadvantages, I guess, they have from our point of view, our perspective, because they didn't get to experience some of these things as part of just life experience. However, they grew up where they don't even know what low speed internet is. They don't know what it's like to not have internet everywhere. They're living at a different level of skepticism and awareness than we can imagine. And I have to imagine, if we look at this big thing, we don't get too tied down in what the agenda-based media is telling us the situation is today. But if we look at that bigger picture, we're all a country made up of people that decided to get up and leave oppression or tyranny and come here and be free, to be capitalists and to work together to aspire to change the world in a good way. We're not expanding and colonializing. We use our militaries to aid as much as to defend liberty. And, this is a good country, and it's weathered through a system that's weathered through a civil war. And if we look at what we are and what we have here, and we look at the means of communications that we have, we've accomplished dealing with printing presses and free speech and radio and television and cable and all those iterations of programming. And we've reached for more. Like you said, we've looked for more from that. And with this new generation, I look forward to what they're going to do to change. I hear you that they've got disadvantages, but again, I'm hoping that they've got as many resources as we can provide for them. We can set good examples for them. We can educate them and hopefully pass on freedom to them in their capable hands.
Agreed.
Man, it's been a great hour. I'm going to ask one more question from roll call, a fellow Indianan. How do you call yourselves? Indianites?
Hoosiers.
Hoosiers. Asked him about the law passed in Indiana about criminals' families not being able to sue for defending law-abiding citizens' lives. You know about this one?
No. I'd have to look into that one. I'm not sure what to talk about criminals' family not being able to sue defending law-abiding citizens' lives. I'm assuming, in our state, we have, the castle doctrine. We have stand your ground. If you are involved in a self-defense shooting, if it's deemed to be a self-defense, justifiable homicide, you're protected in the state, and that's the way it should be. You shouldn't face any legal jeopardy. If somebody's in my house at 2:00 in the morning, I'm under no law requirement to warn them or try to flee my home or to do anything. If you decide that person whom you don't know is unlawfully in your home, you can legally shoot them, and there's nothing the state can do, and they're not going to question your judgment because they didn't belong there. And by that very nature of them not belonging there, they forfeit their life. And the same thing with stand your ground. If you're pumping gas and somebody road rages on you and just starts beating the crud out of you, you can use self-defense. You can use lethal force to stop that assault. All you have to be in is reasonable fear of your life or serious bodily harm, and you can legally defend yourself. And as long as you stay within those parameters and you don't initiate the conflict, they can't bring charges against you, and you're protected. So, that's the way it should be. And it's so weird when I have traveled to foreign countries where they have no gun laws. They're not allowed to carry firearms. Their gun laws are so restrictive. They're not allowed to carry firearms. And the concept of self-defense is so foreign to them, because if they get into a brawl, they defend themselves even with a pocket knife, and they kill the person that assaulted them, they're still going to face murder charges. It's just unbelievable. It's like you're expected to be a victim.
And that's what the lack of castle doctrine is. Like in states that before they have castle doctrine, in the scenario you just mentioned, you wake up in the middle of the night to someone in your home and lethal force is applied because you don't know what's happening. Before castle doctrine, that would be tried as a murder, and you'd have to prove yourself innocent in that case, which is a burden on the victim. You woke up in the middle of the night to a home invasion and you defended your life or the life of your family. You protected your property. In other words, if they're going to walk out with your firearms, you have an obligation to society to do something about that, right? So in the situation without Castle Doctrine, you go to court and you have to prove your innocence. With Castle Doctrine, it states that you are not in a murder situation, like everything you just described there. And I think what Roll Call was talking about is the concept, once they establish Castle Doctrine, it also means that once you've once the court or the system is established that was a justifiable use of lethal force, the family is not then able to sue you civilly, somehow taking their money, their money earner or whatever, like some of those ridiculous cases.
And I mean, that does happen. So when no criminal charges are brought, I mean, I can sue you for anything, right? I can sue you because I don't like the color of your eyes. It doesn't mean I'm going to win, but it does mean that if I have more money than you do, I can wear you down. Or if I get some, attorney that'll work, for me, and they won't take, they don't need any payment until they're so sure they can win the case that they'll take the case for free, knowing that they'll get, 40 or 60% of whatever it is that they can win. And, I mean, it's just a matter of wearing the other person down financially and financially hurting them. And, that's wrong. So yeah, if you do nothing wrong, you certainly shouldn't face civil action. But then again, take a look at what happened to O.J. Simpson, right? He was acquitted, but I think most people would agree that was, the jury was wrong, but that's the way our system works. But then he got sued civilly and, it wrecked his life. So there's the other side of it, right? So that's kind of a bummer when you think about it.
We live in a society where our legal system is set up so that, what is it? I forget what the phrase is, but so that guilty go free, so that the innocent doesn't get, I forget how the phrase goes, but we have the benefit of the doubt to the innocent, and we understand that the consequences of that is not a perfect system, but it's an alternative to totalitarianism and just a ruthless government that horrible.
No, I mean, I wouldn't change anything. I mean, we're all human. We're all fallible. And I'm not saying OJ was guilty. I'm not going to presume to know more than the jury did in that case, but I'm just saying there's a lot of people that felt that he was guilty, so much so that, the family of the victim, Ron Goldman, I think his name was actually sued OJ and won. And that jury in the civil case found him basically guilty of murdering Goldman. So that's kind of, like I said, the other side of the argument.
Well, yeah, and we're talking about an extreme case that is probably more often or more likely a murder than any kind of home invasion or.
Oh yeah, totally, absolutely. It was not a home invasion type situation.
All right, so we've been chatting for more than an hour. I do appreciate you coming on for this series. We're trying to offer some insight to people that are in our 2A community doing good work, and I want to say thanks to you for your continued excellent example. We all know what you've been doing out there, and the way that you do it is worthy of kudos. So thank you for doing what you do for so long and being a good example for those that are out there. Thank you for taking the time to chat with us tonight. I'll end it here with giving you as much time as you want to let people, take whatever closing time you want, and then we'll wrap it up with our friend Charles from Tucson.
Okay, great. Well, first of all, thank you for having me on the show. And I also know that you're extremely politically active, and you're constantly trying to rally the troops and get, social media folks together and moving in the same direction along, not just the people with social media audiences, but, the viewers as well. And I think you do a good job of doing that. And I greatly appreciate what you do. And it was, absolute pleasure being here and joining you on this live stream. And that's about it, guys. I mean, if you don't know who I am, just Google Military Arms Channel and you'll pretty much see the first 5 or 10 pages of stuff, because we've been doing it for so long. I think, gosh, man, it's in the 11th year that we've been doing YouTube. So, yeah, man, thanks for having me on. And I hope that some of the folks out there are motivated by some of the stuff that was said and they become politically active. I'd like to see everybody. And by that, it's as simple as, first of all, joining a Second Amendment group that you approve of. I like the GOA. And then also writing letters to your representatives, making phone calls, and trying to get involved with local organizations at the grassroots and state levels, and trying to, you know, push the ball forward and not just stop new anti-gun legislation, but to roll back the clock on legislation that's already passed. Yeah.
Right on.
All right, man.
Tim, and everybody go listen to the Foul Territory tonight with Gary Gizzard over on Gun Channels.
The guys and gals of gunwebsites.com encourage you to take a CCW class every year, practice at least once a month, and carry every day. Thanks for watching gunwebsites.com.